As you have seen in previous lessons, an EQ on anything is just an EQ, dealing with the spectrum balance of the source. Now, when we need to talk about the mastering EQ, nothing more can be said than you're probably expecting a well-mixed song. For mastering, if you're the mastering engineer, you're expecting a well-mixed song. And if you're mastering your own song, well, you would expect that it's well mixed. And usually, if I'm mastering my own music, which I really don't like to do, I really prefer somebody else to do master mine, even though I master so many others tracks and releases. I prefer my tracks to be mastered by somebody else. Just a fresh pair of ears, fresh pair of listening skills on something that I've went over a couple of dozen of times. If we're talking about the mastering EQ, whatever change is induced there is usually not a big one. And I would say usually, because if you have a really good mix, a well-balanced mix, a change on the master is never as big as you think it should be. So when you're dealing with the mastering EQ, the changes you make with the mastering EQ are never that great. At least they're not for me. So when I'm doing mastering, if the mix is really not balanced well, then I have to do something extreme. And by extreme, I even think, like 3 dBs of boosting something or attenuating something, maybe even 6. You never know what you're going to get. But if the mix you received is quite good, or if it's your track and I'm, thinking you mix the track to the best of your possibilities, the changes you're going to induce with the EQ are never going to be that great. Now, to talk about the case where you're mastering your own music, if I had to master my own song, let's say this is the EQ I'm going to be using. So as you see from the example before, we have cut some stereo information off of our master chain. So from the side part of the signal, we have removed everything, all the low frequencies below 200 Hertz. Now, what I would do if at any point I would have to do something as drastic as 4, 5, 6 dBs, if it was my song, I'd probably just go back and change whatever I needed to change inside the song itself, if I had the nerves to do it. Of course, sometimes this could be an easier solution, because if it sounds good, it actually is good. But if I really do have the patience, I would go back into the song to fix it. If I think the song is really special, at least for me, if I think the song is really special, I would really, nitpick about details like that. But I would try not to induce a change like this. So if I've seen in the end that something like this on the mastering EQ is needed, I would go back and change it in the mix. So that I don't have to do that to everything like this unified. I would try to accentuate the elements that actually have frequencies right there, or accentuate, let's say, leads or the drums, the elements that have a lot of their power based in this location, between 1 and 2K, and try to boost those up, much rather than doing this on the master. Of course, when you're mastering somebody else's music, you can't really do that. You can maybe advise them to change something like that and give it back to you, but more often than not, you would just do whatever is necessary to make the song sound great. And when it comes to mastering and mastering EQ, sometimes it's just broad strokes. So meaning that sometimes it's just really wide movements like this, wide corrections of certain frequencies with the most amplitude of, let's say, 0.8, 1.5 dB. So even that much of a change on the master with the mastering EQ is going to be enough to induce a real change, change that you can really hear and feel. That really translates to a lot of difference at the end once it goes through the rest of the chain and through the limiting. That tiny bit of difference is going to, move and shift that spectral balance, so that once it goes into the limiter, it will come out differently than if you haven't done that. Now, having said that, you can do the broad strokes, as I said, small changes and shifts in the balance of the spectrum, really broad. What you would also do more often than not is doing really, really tiny and really tight takeouts like this. So notch filters that would take out a certain resonant frequency that you really don't need, because that one frequency ringing that much is just making the song ring too much in that specific part, and it's making it, unlistenable once it passes through the limiters and compression and everything else. So maybe even saturation after this. There's so many effects used to enhance music in the mastering process. I try to do the least amount possible, but yeah, always I would, every time I do mastering, I experiment with something new. I don't like to stay in a routine with anything. So if I'm taking out frequencies like this, most of the times these are going to concur with the tonality of the song. So maybe with the key of the song, or one of the keys in the song being used where a lot of elements actually collide together, and they sonically with phase amplify each other, and they just ring too much right there. So I could actually use an EQ to remove that. I could use an EQ like this and check up that note. I could find it by hearing it. So let's check something in this song and see if we can find a certain note. What I'm going to actually do is going to pull it up like this so I can hear the ringing and a specific note like this. I'm going to try to identify the note that could have a lot of harmonics right there ringing. So it seems I have found it. This is the actual tune of the song. That's the key that the song is in, and that might be ringing a lot. Now, it might be is the right word, since anything you boost up like this with a really resonant EQ is going to be ringing anyway. Now, this is not a means to, just go through with a resonant EQ like this. Everything's going to sound ringy. And if you start removing everything that sounds ringy with a ringy filter, you're not doing anything productive, believe me. You need to be able to hear the problem and then use this technique to actually find the frequency in question easier, because boosting it up is easier to identify it than searching with that same notch facing downwards like this. It really doesn't help that much. You can, but it's just harder. This just makes it easier for you to identify where the problematic frequency is. Now that I know what it is, I can just reverse, or inverse to say better, inverse this gain. And now the gain is actually attenuating those frequencies. Let's hear the difference with and without it. Yeah, that takes a lot of that harmonic. I think it should be maybe done, but not so severely, like maybe a couple of dBs, and that would be it. Basically, when I hear a resonant frequency, it's usually in the low frequencies or somewhere in the mids. Something is going to happen, a certain effect, but even then, more often than not, I would use a dynamic EQ that would, react only when that resonant frequency gets out of hand, only when it starts gaining too much volume, more than I would actually like. So to talk about removing resonant frequencies, I would usually use a dynamic EQ that's going to react to the amplitude of the frequencies in question. But if that resonant frequency appears to be in the low frequencies, somewhere in the bass or where the kick drum is, you could use the static EQ, because those are the only elements that actually have any low frequencies. So you could use static EQ. Once they are there, the static EQ is going to take care of the resonant frequency. But once they are not there, resonant EQ that's pulling down with that notch filter on that frequency is not going to be affecting anything, since nothing else has low frequencies anyway. So we can try that. Let's see if we can hear anything resonant right here. So just so I can show you what's happening, let's try that. So this is also, so when we need the key, we can do this. So you can see that removing that tiny band of frequencies right here at 56.9, 57 really makes a lot of difference. Imagine there was a problem with the resonant frequency and you wanted to remove it. This will be the way to do it, but I would never do it as drastically as I've did right here to actually show you what's being taken out. When I'm starting to find that frequency, I would do the same thing, just like this, minus maximum amount of dBs I can, just to identify that that's actually the problematic one, and then I would add that back in until it was just good enough, and when it starts ringing, I just pull back down again, and now I know that I have fixed it just enough so it doesn't make problems, but the least amount of attenuation, of amplitude, so that I don't induce too much of a difference into the feeling of the groove of the song. So with the master EQ, basically it's what I would do always is remove stereo frequencies from the side. I would remove anything stereo below 180, 200 hertz, depending on what sounds better. And I would definitely deal with the spectral balance of the song. So resonant frequencies that might be causing problems and spectral balance of the song. That would be the most important priority, meaning that maybe I hear there is not enough high frequencies in the mix, I would just do this. So I would, amplify them, boost them up with the gain, or use a different kind of a curve or a different kind of a, EQ, maybe an analog EQ, depending on what sounds best. But basically that's it. I would just be really concerned about the spectrum balance. How much bass, how much mids, how much highs is actually in that song? Is that the right balance? So that would be my first priority, my biggest concern when dealing with the EQ on the master bus. That would be my first concern. And then removing the resonant frequencies, then maybe even dealing with some of the details, maybe even boosting on the sides, boosting certain frequencies where I hear that, the stereo information sounds really nice when it's boosted, something like that. So trying to enhance the song if possible, although I wouldn't play with it too much because I don't want to mess up any balance that was there already. Once you do something like this, once you boost something only in the sides or boost something only in the mids, so only mid or side, only the mono or the stereo information in the signal, what you're doing is you're actually changing the balance of the mix. Every time I boost all the mid, signal, everything that was mono in the song, every time you do that, everything that had in the song of all the tracks, everything that had more mono than stereo information is going to be louder than anything that had stereo information, and vice versa. If I boosted the side information right here, it would give you more stereo, and that sounds really wide and nice, but you would actually mess up your mix. So everything that had more stereo in it, all the sounds that were more wide and more stereo would now be louder in this portion of frequencies. That means that you're actually messing with the mix that you've done, and probably you've spent a lot of time, trying to make sure that that mix is perfect. Now by doing this, you would change it too much. So as I said, when it's my song I'm mastering, I try to see if there are any big problems that I'm trying to fix right there with the mastering EQ and the mastering process, and probably fix it inside the track itself. If it's somebody else's track and they're a friend or I know them, I would usually try to point it out to see if they can do something about it better than me doing something about it, because it's going to be more transparent. And then in the end, mastering a song for a client, you would do anything necessary to make it sound the best possible way.